Alright, what's up guys? FallinWinter here with the deck profile for the Oracle Think Tanks with the Generation Stride stuff, so GBT1. This is like a CoCo Susanoo build, since CoCo's my favorite card pretty much, and the early hand advantage from the CoCo and Lulu skills is pretty great. So pretty much the trigger lineups, other than Lulu, I'll talk about her after, is 12 crit, because 12 crits are fantastic, and there's not many moments when draws are necessary in this deck, because if you draw more than what you do in a game where you get all of your stuff off, that usually ends up you decking out before you can do anything or put enough pressure on them. Psychic Bird's really just in there for the extra option. If you need the soul for like lemonade or stuff like that, it's not really necessary, but it's nice to just have the option there. Next is the 4 heal triggers. I run 3 Lozenge Magus. They're all different heal triggers, so it's just aesthetic. If you want, you can run the Lozenge Magus just to get the extra chance to shuffle your deck and stuff and fix a stack that you know you're not going to hit or something like that, so that you put the triggers back in. That's the trigger lineup. And then Lulu is, if you don't know, is on Ride on grade 3. You move her to rear guard from Soul Blast 2, and then you draw a card, which works with CoCo, which needs no soul when she is ridden. So that's pretty much your option, and helps you remove soul and stuff like that for the skill. For the grade 1s, we have Perfect Guards, Battles's Chocolate, because that's pretty much one of the only two other than Tetra Magus, and then the new ones. Technically, we have the new ones here, but what you run really depends on your meta, or what's being run at, or how you feel like running it, since the unflipping is amazing in this deck because you really need it to plus even more than you normally would. But against decks like the Cross, decks like the Cross, basically with this card, you can only guard Vanguard. Sorry for the glare. So if they decide to attack your Vanguard with the Cross, or they attack your rear guard with the Cross, and you can't guard it because you don't have a perfect guard, they get to restand and use their the end skill for basically no minus to them. They just plus off of it, and you can't do anything about it unless you want to drop like all of your grade zeros. It kind of sucks. So it's really up to you and how you want to run your deck, since the unflipping does help, but like I said, it can potentially mess you up. Okay,
there you go,
well,
there's a glare.
I apologize for the glare. That wasn't me, by the way. So for the next lineup of the grade 1s, we have, what is this, 5 of basically any 8K vanilla, so they have 2 of them out right now. These are amazing because Tom exists, so he's just, you want to hit numbers for 16, and cross rides aren't super prevalent right now, so it actually does something. I was running 6, but I wanted to make space for the lemonades, since as of right now, because you don't get the unflips from the other perfect guard, these are pretty much to replace that. If you want, you can run 1 more of the Stride Fodder card and 1 more 8K vanilla and replace these if you want to run the other perfect guard. And then we have 3 of these, or 4 if you don't use lemonades, since these are amazing. You can use them by calling them the field and searching out stuff like that, searching out your Susanoo, and discarding you're basically a deck thinning of grade 3s, which in this deck you kind of don't want, just because they're also part of your Stride Fodder, and you usually want 8K vanilla in back row, so you're basically just using this as extra grade 3s for stride. And yeah, the lemonades, Soul Blast 2 to unflip are pretty much useful for unflipping in case. I don't normally need to do that, but in a few cases they have come in handy and let me push for game or plus hard enough just to survive. For grade 2s, we have 4 Battle Stitch Heart. You can probably run something other than this. I just like the art, honestly, and in the case that they rush you down more than you want to, since you need 2 damage to activate CoCo skill, so by grade 3 ride you need to be at 2 damage in most cases. In case they rush you down harder than that and you don't want to be caught in the middle of that, you can ride this and make sure that they can't hit you, or at least hit a number against you, which is a problem a lot of the time, especially with the Nova Grapplers and stuff coming back and pretty much rushing down really hard. Next we have the 12k attacker for Generation Break, which only attacks for 12 on Vanguard and any Generation Break one to do it. I just like them in here because in case you don't happen to have a rear guard, which I find is more often than not, at least for one of the columns, at least until later game, it's nice to be able to hit Vanguard since you stride a lot with this deck, honestly. I tech one of him in just because in case I don't have the means of getting the extra draw, he's kind of handy. Basically his skill is Generation Break 1 when it attacks a Vanguard, I believe. Yep. So it needs to attack Vanguard and be boosted by Oracle Think Tank. You draw a card for Counter Blast 1. There's no real downsides to this card, it's just that in most cases I'm using my Counter Blast for the other skills, like for Susanoo and the stride units, so he's just there for extra precaution and stuff like that. Grade 2s, we have the Silent Toms, which are your main pressure part of this deck besides striding. His skill is when he attacks, you are not allowed to guard, or your opponent is not allowed to guard with grade 0s, meaning it's usually perfect guard or anything that's 10k shield or higher needs to be guarded with like 2 cards. So he's really useful. With the 16, he guarantees that your opponent's guarding with 2 cards basically, without triggers. Lastly, for the grade 3 lineup, we have SP CoCo, and basically 4 of them. These are your main early drawing for this deck, and so that's why I run 4, so that I make sure I run into her. Her skill is on ride, you Counter Blast 2 if you have 1 or less soul, and you draw 2 cards. So paired up with the Lulu, you pretty much just draw 3, and you remove everything from soul and call your Lulu from, or to rear guard. It's just really easy early game hand plussing, so it helps out the deck a lot just to make sure it survives long enough to get the cards it needs and to start striding and plussing. Then we've got the new unit, which is Susanoo. His Generation Break 2 is when your hand has 4 or more cards, this gets an extra crit and +5. So, or 4 or more cards, but yeah, basically it's kind of like a Amaterasu that hits harder, but it needs Generation Break 2 to work. So it attacks, it gets the extra crit, and even if you have 2 cards after your drive check, as long as you get the 4 cards in hand by the end of it, you get the extra crit and the +5. So usually it's most of the time, if not always, when you're attacking with this thing, since your hand doesn't tend to drop that low. Its other skill is on stride, so when you stride something on top of it, you can counterblast one, check top 2 cards of your deck, add one to hand, and put the other one on bottom. So that's partly the easiest way to start stacking cards on bottom. This is pretty much what you ride into right after CoCo as soon as you can, just because once you hit Generation Break 2, it's a good pressure card along with Tom, since you swing with this, force them to guard because they extra critical, and if you hit more criticals, which there's 12 of them, you just put them on the Toms, and you just force more guard out of them. And lastly, for the stride units, we have 4 of Keating, which is the Alcohol Dragon. So pretty much when you stride, it's the basic one. So on hit, you check top 2 cards, add one to hand, put the other one on bottom of deck. So it's a decent way to apply pressure if your opponent wants to not let you add more cards to your hand. And if not, then you just plus more, since if you stride him over Susanoo, you get 2 cards instead of 1, since you get one off of Susanoo's skill, and then the hit lets you add another one. So he did it for counterblast 1. And then lastly, we have Takemikazuchi, which is the Persona stride unit. So you stride him, and as long as you have one face-up G unit, you can pretty much activate his skill, counterblast 2, choose a copy of him, flip him over, and he needs 2 face-up strides in G-Zone, and you're able to check top 4, add 2 of them to hand, and put the other 2 on bottom of deck. So as long as you have you showed once, you can pretty much activate it twice, or you can activate the skill since you'll have 2 after you pay its costs. He's just the other way to get more 1-for-1s for counterblast in this deck, so he's just kind of one of those more mandatory types of cards. That's the whole deck. Sorry that took a little longer than some of the other ones, just because this has a lot of skills going on now and all of that. If you guys have any questions, comments, or whatever about the deck, let me know, and I'll try to answer them. That should be everything, so we'll see you in the next video.